matters as former President Trump and some of his congressional allies spread lies about the Capitol insurrection using inflammatory language. CNN's Brian Todd is working the story for us. Brian, Trump and some of his supporters are attacking the very officers who protected the Capitol that day.
They are doing that, Jim, and they're not only inaccurate with these remarks, they're outright dangerous, and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has frankly had enough. Security concerns ramped up tonight on Capitol Hill. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi furious with Republicans who she says have attacked U.S. Capitol police officers who fought rioters on January 6th. Pelosi's office issued a statement today characterizing remarks from former President Donald Trump as, quote, vile. Trump said in a statement he had spoken to the mother and husband of Ashley Babbitt, the rioter who was shot and killed by a U.S. Capitol police officer as she tried to crawl through a broken window near the Speaker's lobby on January 6th. Trump said Babbitt had been, quote, murdered, even though the officer was cleared of any criminal wrongdoing. And Trump said of the unnamed officer, quote, we know who he is. There must be justice.
I do believe that officer is at risk, could be at risk. His family could be at risk if his name gets out in the way the president is suggesting.
Speaker Pelosi called the Republican attacks on officers, quote, disgusting, said it's time for House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy to, quote, get off his hands and stand up to Republicans who've gone after the officers. No response yet from McCarthy. Pelosi is especially upset with characterizations like this one from Arizona GOP Congressman Paul Gosar.
Director Ray, do you know who executed Ashley Babbitt?
No, I don't know.
This comes as we get disturbing new information on threats to members of Congress, which new Capitol Police Chief Tom Manger tells Wolf have increased dramatically in recent months.
We typically, just a couple of years ago, had around 6,000 or 7,000. This year, I think we'll be up close to 10,000 threats that we're investigating.
Manger says his department is working with local police departments across the U.S. to investigate threats and coordinate protection for members of Congress. A former Secret Service agent says that's a massive undertaking, since the Capitol Police and their partners have to spread out all over the country to protect members while they're in their home districts.
They have to look at telephone records. They have to look at IP addresses. They have to understand where these threats are coming from, identify that potential hostile actor, go interview them, interview friends and family and associates of that individual to fully assess, does this person have the tendency or the ability to engage in violent acts against this particular political leader.
Now, what worries the security experts we spoke to is the possibility that the threats to members of Congress will only escalate from here. As former Secret Service agent Jonathan Wackrow says, so many potential attackers, including violent extremists, are hiding in plain sight and could be incited to act by a statement like the one former President Trump just made about that one Capitol Police officer. Jim?
All right, Brian Todd, thanks so much for that report. Let's dig deeper now with former FBI Deputy Director and CNN senior law enforcement analyst Andrew McCabe. He's the author of The Threat, How the FBI Protects America in the Age of Terror and Trump. And, you know, when the former president calls for justice against the officer who shot and killed Ashley Babbitt, who was climbing through a window that day, as we all saw in the video, how dangerous is that when you see the former president engaging in this kind of rhetoric, saying we know who you are and so on?
It's incredibly dangerous, Jim. We know this for a fact. This isn't something we're theorizing about, right? We have seen before the impact that the president's words have on his most diehard and emotional supporters. We've seen an attempted bombing plot, right, by a domestic extremist who was arrested some years ago who said he was following the directions of President Trump. We all saw the insurrectionists on January 6th acting what many of them have said they thought they were following his direction. And let's face it, when he says, we know who you are, that's a threat. That's the same sort of language that a mob boss or a drug kingpin would use to threaten a subordinate or
even though he can try to hide behind the language and say that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That is a threat. Those words are threatening. So you have the former president of the United States threatening members of law enforcement.
Incredible.
It's just outrageous.
It is outrageous, and this comes as the Capitol Police Chief says they're seeing heightened threats against lawmakers. So when Trump does this, does that add fuel to the fire and potentially lead to situations where you could see threats in other parts of the country? A lot of these members are on their brace right now.
That's absolutely right. And, you know, We know that August has been a period of particular sensitivity for these sorts of threats across the domestic extremist community. DHS reminded us of this really concerning threat last week with the warning that they put out. So we are in a period of great sensitivity. It's also the month that the members go home for vacation and campaigning and all the things that they do. So you've got a dispersed group of potential targets. You've got a heavily taxed police force, the Capitol Police, that are responsible for protecting those members wherever they are. It's a very, very tenuous situation.
And do you think Kevin McCarthy needs to tell these lawmakers, cut it out, tell the former president, cut it out when it comes to this sort of rhetoric?
Well, he should, right? He's the leader. And when you are the leader and your troops, your members, whoever those folks might be, are acting irresponsibly, are creating situations of greater threat to your own membership and to others, it's time for that leader to step up and get his folks in line.